Hi, welcome to Next Level Carpentry. I'm Matt Jackson, and I'm inviting you to spend a few minutes with the master in the workshop here of Next Level Carpentry. There's a door back here. I made 4 of these. They end up being pocket doors with frosted glass in them. And each pocket door gets a latch in it, and this is kind of like over-the-top pocket door hardware made by Emtek with these fancy, complicated instructions. But basically what it is a mortised box lock that gets mortised into the edge of the door. And this crazy fancy escutcheon goes in the face of the door as a passage latch for a bathroom. But the reason I'm doing the video is to show the process I use for making templates. Obviously, with this level of hardware, custom-made doors, the hardware's got to fit perfectly, and I'm going to walk you through the steps I use for making quick custom router templates for mortising in things like this plate that goes on the edge of this box lock. And then there's a mortise through the door for this little bump out here on the back of these plates. The template, or the strike plate here, or the edge plate for this, is 7/8 by 8 1/16, 9/32 of an inch deep. That's pretty precise. The mortise for this is 11/16 wide, however long this is, and then it's 3 7/8 deep. So I'm going to make 3 templates. One I'll start off with for the strike plate. The second one will be for that long elongated mortise that you see here. And then last will be this rounded corner rectangular opening for installing these plates into the face of the door. I hope that makes sense, but I'm going to jump right in and get to work on that. And my material of choice for this is MDF. I've got a sheet of 1/2 inch here that's going to work a little bit better for these templates. Sometimes I use 1/4 inch, but I'm using 1/2 for this, and you'll see how and why. The reason I'm going to take the time to make templates for these is that I've got to do 4 locks that are the same. And because the templates are quick and easy to make and super accurate and repeatable, it's worth going through the extra effort of making a template. If it was just one door with this hardware, it might be more practical just to do it the old way and scribe and chisel the opening. This is a little bit unusual for me. I'm shooting the second video in the same day. A little earlier I was shooting the one where I did repairs to the paint grade wood for these same doors, and hopefully everybody's had a chance to see that also. So the first template is going to be to center up this piece in the edge of the door. This is exactly 1 3/4, and the plate is exactly 7/8, and I want it centered up so there'll be 7/16 in from either edge. And I'm going to cut the pieces that I'll use to make this routing template to fit those parameters. There's all sorts of ways to build this sort of a template, but the principles remain the same. So for this first mortise template, I'm going to rip 2 pieces, 2 inches, 2 pieces at 2 7/16 strong, and then 1 piece that's exactly the width of this faceplate for the mortise lock. I'm using a nice sharp fine-tooth cross-cut blade for these cuts so that the edges come out perfectly smooth for the routing process. Rather than use a tape measure or ruler, I'll set the width for the rip for this plate with the plate itself. Another key component of templates like this is CA glue. I've got my little CA glue arsenal here. I will put a little spritz of activator on the 2 7/16 inch piece. I actually made that 2 1/2. I'll trim it. And then I'll put corresponding globs of Gorilla Glue CA glue, not Gorilla Glue glue, so that they'll line up with those 2 spots. I'm using the table saw surface to line up the edges of these pieces, and I'm using the fence so I can push against, get everything to line up perfectly there. And the beauty of it is 10 seconds and that's done. I'll do that with both of these pieces. Stick fast activator is my favorite because of the can size. It's handy to use in a pouch, but any aerosol activator for CAA glue works pretty well as well. So now I have 2 of these assemblies. This is perfectly flush in the back on both of them, and this lip sticks over the same amount. I'll clamp my sample piece in a vise. And you can see by the difference between the pencil mark and the edge of this plate how much I need to trim off the face of these pieces to get this all to line up and center the plate and the edge of the door. Like I said, I made these pieces about 1/2 inch, and I need to take a little bit off, somewhere in the neighborhood of 7/16 of an inch ultimately. I call that perfect. And now the space is a perfect match to the width of that plate. With all these parts cut to size, I'll do the next step, which is to set the length of the template, like so. A little shot of activator on these parts, and a dab of glue on this. About out of this little bottle of glue, but hopefully there's enough for this setup. Just glue this first one in here random like. Everything's nice and flush, and even if this was plywood, it doesn't glue up as well. It's a little less predictable. I always got to remember which I activated and which I glued. So we're going to start about here. Flop that down, put the plate right there, and then add this second piece. This part isn't rocket surgery. Just going to glue this on the other side, and we'll have a perfect template for that part. So let's activate this and glue this. And I'm going to line this up just so my template's lined up on the end. Not that it's all that important. Give it a good push. You can screw around for hours trying different methods, but you can't beat that for getting a perfect fit in a very short order. Going by dimensions on the instruction sheet, I've located the center line of the lock mortise so that I can locate this template on the edge of the door and have the lock turn button end up at 36 inches above finished floor. You can see how the face of this box lock fits exactly in here. The combination of the face plate and the mounting plate, whatever you want to call that, is 9/64 of an inch, which is how deep this mortise has to be into the edge of the door. All my metric savvy viewers are cringing right about now because I have to measure 9/64 of an inch on this template. In my book, that's a strong 1/8 of an inch, which will be right there. It takes a pretty stubby pattern bit for the bearing to ride on the template and not cut too deep here. The cutting length of this bit is too long because the bearing barely catches on the template. So I've got one of my real stubby little guys here. The cutting length is maybe 1/2 inch. And when it's set to the right height, like so, the full bearing is riding on the template. I'll do a test fit of this to double check the depth. And in this case, a little too deep is better than not deep enough because I can always shim the mounting plate during installation. I always use a screw type clamp when clamping templates. I don't trust the squeeze grip ones so much, but I've got this clamped up to another sample piece from the door project. And we'll check the depth of cut of this router bit. I don't know about you, but I find corded power tools much more effective when they're actually plugged in. And people that are handy with a plunge router would certainly use it for an instance like this. As it is, I just sweep the bit down in there, being careful not to nick the template on the way. Let's see how we did. The caliper is zeroed out, and we use the little depth gauge here, and we have 10/64 of an inch deep, and I'm going to go with that. I'll make a reference mark here at 12 inches up off the bottom of this sample piece so that I can line up the handle center mark with it, just like I'll do on the doors, to get the mortise in the right place vertically on the doors themselves. You can see the marks line up here, and that tells me that it's centered up correctly this direction. And I know it's centered side to side because the two side pieces started out the same. Now we have this nice, perfect mortise with rounded corners, and it's repeatable. So on all 4 doors, I use the same template and make these mortises quickly, easy, and accurately, making the time invested in making that template more than worth it. For these corners, I have this cool little driving square corner chisel, which isn't going to do me any good because it doesn't fit down in the mortise. So I get to resort to the old-fashioned method of using a chisel to square up the corners. That's not so bad. Now the box lock plate will fit right down in there, as will the face template. That's tough to beat. On these mortises, just a little snug is always good. If there's any variance in the parts from one to the other, there probably isn't, but getting a drive-in fit using a wooden or rubber mallet, this makes for a perfect seamless installation. All right, the second template I need to make is for this oblong hole. Unique thing about this template is it needs to have a full radius of 11/16, I guess it'd be 11/32 radius, but a full half circle at the end of each. So I'm going to show you how I make that template with rounded ends instead of squared out ones. It's pretty slick, easy, and fun. The construction and design of this template will be very similar to the first one, but I'll start out by making a mark about 2.5 inches in from the edge of this piece, and then I'll drill an 11/16 hole with one side of the hole tangent to that line. Like so. And now I set the far side of the blade to that same 2¼ inch dimension, so that the curve comes just tangent to the edge of the circle. Hate it when that happens. It's supposed to be 2.5 to that far side of the blade, not 2¼ No harm done. And I still missed it by a smidge. I'm going to shave this off. And of course everybody knows that only happens when the camera's rolling. Now by looking through the hole, I'm just setting the far side of the blade to come tangent with the other side of that hole. And that sequence of steps gives me a piece that's 11/16 wide with a half radius on each end. I'm going to make 2 more 2-inch strips, and then 2 pieces 2 9/16 to center up the slot. Just like on the first template, I trimmed the 2 9/16 pieces until the 11/16 piece fits snugly in between. And this next step isn't going to surprise anybody. A little bit of activator on that part, a little bit of glue on this part. Line up these 2 marks, the tangent point and the length, so they are one and the same. Same thing on the other end. A few seconds of insistence there. Then I'll spray that and that. And finally glue up this piece. Line up the end mark and press. If this template had a longer term shelf life, I'd use a lot more glue so that it could handle abuses of the real world. But as it is, as long as I'm careful and don't drop this thing on the floor, it'll work perfectly. And you can see that the hash marks on the template fit perfectly within this oblong hole in the template. Because I made the sides of both of these templates 2 inches, the space in between is the same, and when I lay these templates on top of each other and line up the center mark, you can see that the mortises are centered up with each other so that this view looks just like it does on the template drawing, so that I can use the mortise template in the same fashion as before by lining up the center mark and setting the router bit deeper. And I'm doing this largely as an exercise to show how to make the template with these rounded ends by drilling a hole. Because this mortise for the box is internal, it doesn't have to be so perfect and nice looking. I'm actually going to get the 3 7/8 inch depth of it by chasing this mortise with a spade bit to take the material out of there for the full depth. But the template will serve to perfectly line up that hole and give it a nice smooth edge at the beginning. I switched to a bit with a longer cut length than the short one. Unfortunately, the diameter is also bigger and it's really tight on this slot, so I have to be super careful to make sure the bearing is down within that slot before I fire up the router so that I don't go over to the edge and gouge the new template. But that gives the start of that secondary mortise on the edge of the door. And you can see how nicely centered and lined up everything is, so that once I continue down and drill this mortise out, the box lock will slide down into that hole and the mounting plate will fit in this top mortise nice and clean. I put the template back in place, lowered the router bit so that the bearing is still riding on the template itself, and I'll take another pass in that mortise and deepen it a bit. And I can keep doing that by extending the bit, changing to a longer bit, removing the template and routing, and get that mortise as deep as I want it. But the template has served its purpose to set up a perfect guide for embiggening that mortise until this whole box lock drops down into it. All right, got 2 templates down and 1 to go. And the third template is for this rectangular opening here. Once the mortise is put through the door, there's only a thin skin on either face of the door, and this opening goes all the way through the door. And what it allows is this recess of this face plate to fit in so that the plate becomes flush with the door. It has to be on both faces of the door, but the rectangular opening is 2 3/16, and by looking through the hieroglyphics here, the opening is 1 inch back from the edge of the door, so it goes from 1 inch to 3 3/16 across here. The general process for making this template is very similar to what you've seen before, with the difference that this one indexes just to the edge of the door. It doesn't have to straddle the edge of the door. So I'm starting out with a piece that is 3 inches wide and a strip that's 2 inches wide. And this offset in the pattern will hold this opening 1 inch back from the edge of the door. I've got a piece that's 2 3/16 wide here that'll get cut to leave the opening, and then another strip for the other side to leave this opening. So I'm going to get out the CA glue and get this stuck together. You got to love this. I had this piece of 2 3/16 material. That's the space for the opening. I thought I'll just go chop this about in half without measuring or anything. I just lopped that in half and that thing is within the 64th of an inch of eyeballing it dead center. Wish I could do that when I planned it. Okay. Second verse, let's see, no, this is the third verse, same as the first 2. I'm going to activate 3 spots and glue 3 spots. Stick that together. This is so much quicker than measuring and gauging and marking and everything. This just makes everything happen automatically. So that's together. Let's see, let's find the center of this, which is 10 3/8 approximately. It's not that critical. Our opening is 6 7/16. Call it 6 1/2. We'll go 3 1/4 for our first piece. Spritz that. Glue this. Glue is squeaking, it's running low. My little holder here helps because the glue will stay on edge at an angle. Kind of keeps it closer to the tip. That's why I made it that way. Let's get this glued up. So 6 7/16 is the height we want. I'll measure it exactly this time. Let's see if I like that. I did it upside down and backwards. Yeah, that'll be all right. Already spritzed this, I think, but spritz it again. And glue it up. Yep, let's give it just a skosh extra. There's a big flange on that escutcheon that would cover any discrepancies, and I don't want to make it too small. Let's double check. Yes, just like we like it. Let us spritz this, spritz that, and that, glue this and that. Just like that. Like I said, because this is a hidden installation, The tolerances aren't as tight, so I'm not spending any extra time on the template. This piece is a casting. There's going to be some variance in it, whereas the stamped pieces are more exact in their size. This gives it a little play for the hardware as it's installed, so that escutcheon will drop right down in that mortise with no trouble and look beautiful. So I hope you're reading between the lines here. Very few of these locks ever get installed. I don't expect this, or I didn't plan this to be a tutorial of how to install this particular lock. I just want to show methods that can be used for quickly making super accurate templates, customized to anything. This same setup here can be used for routing hinges on the edge of a door. You just drop the hinge in between these blocks as you glue it up, and the hole comes out exactly the size of the piece you're mortising in. I guess I should show this piece on the edge of the door. So once everything's set up, this will get mortised in to the edge of the door and allow that plate to recess in there. The instructions are for an 1 3/8" door. These are 1 3/4 to match other doors on the job. And so on an 1 3/8" door, this mortise goes through to the box mortise that goes in the edge of the door. But in this case, I'll just route it a little deeper than this hole, and then I'll drill 3 holes through for the hardware to install. But the bottom line is we'll have this ready-made mortise done with a router, all set to the exact depth, consistent setback from the edge, etc. It's worth taking 2 minutes to make a template, which is about all it takes when I'm not shooting video, to reproduce 8 of these mortises on these 4 doors. So as I was saying, the time it takes to make these templates compared to how long it does, to how long it takes to chop and chisel those, laying them out with a square and everything, to me it's just a no-brainer. Make a template. These are cheap and easy. This MDF is just scrap from a job and basically disposable. Who knows if I'll ever install a lock like this again on another job? Probably not. So I won't bother keeping these templates around on a shelf collecting dust, because I'll just throw them out, and if in 2 months I got to set another lock like this, I'll just make a new batch of templates. If I'm not shooting video, I can easily make these in a half an hour, and it would take darn near that long to chisel one of those mortises in the hard way. So I guess that's that. Like I said, this is kind of unusual. I shot 2 video projects today. It's getting late, it's dark outside, and I got to get these doors done. So I will say I hope you found the video helpful, useful, insightful. Hopefully some of these steps can be used on other projects you're working on. If you'd like to subscribe to Next Level Carpentry, if you haven't already, check it out. You'll be notified when new videos are uploaded. It's free, which is a wonderful thing. I will put links on the Next Level Carpentry Amazon influencers page for some of the tools and supplies I've used in this video. In case you can't find them locally, it's always great if you find something on that influencers page that you need. You can buy it at the same price to you, but Amazon actually supports Next Level Carpentry by paying ad fees to the channel for things that are posted on that site. With these templates done, I've got to get to the serious work of routing in and mortising in the locks for these 4 doors and get that taken care of. And so I'm going to get to work, and I will just tell everybody, thanks for watching. See you next time. Well, I've been having all kinds of video production issues today. The camera battery keeps dying, and I forgot to zoom out when I was routing this before. So I've got this first faceplate template set up on the edge of one of the pocket doors, and so I'm going to show the routing process. I've set this bit so that it'll make that mortise 9/64 inch deep. As I said before, I'm not using a plunge router. I'm very careful to start up the router in the middle of this with the bit spinning in the middle. I don't want it to jump over and nick that. So if I start it right, by the time it plunges in, the only thing that'll hit the template is the bearing, and it'll keep everything nice and clean. So I'm going to do this. And common sense tells me to let the router stop completely before I pull it out of here. I can always repair a nicked jig, but it's a pain. Because I learned my square corner notching chisel here isn't going to work in this narrow of a mortise, I can leave the template on and use it as a guide for squaring up corners with a sharp chisel. Gotta love that. And that's all there is to it. End up with a perfect 7/8 by 6 and whatever mortise that accepts this plate just wonderfully. There's a flange or whatever you want to call it on the back of there. Keeps this from dropping in, but if I put it in upside down, that fit is pretty tough to beat for the 10 seconds it took to route it once the template was made. And I can quickly make all 4 of these mortises equally accurate and just as fast. Well, you can see by that sequence how having a routed profile for the drill bit to follow for all these holes makes for a nice clean job, and it keeps the mortise square and centered with the face of the wood so the box drops in there nice and clean. I can go back with the router and take out these little teeth left between the holes that were drilled, and I can start by running a flush trim router bit down through there using that same template. Well, I thought you might enjoy seeing this routing template in action. This is the one for routing the recessed mortise. I guess the mortise is recessed for this escutcheon plate in the door. I've got one more door to do over here. So I thought I'd just do a quick run through so you can see how well these MDF templates work for what they're made for. Let's do this. The big instruction sheet here tells me that this mortise is 13/16 of an inch down from the top of the mortise for the edge plate for the box lock. This is the top of the door. 13/16 actually centers it up, but they have to give a dimension. So that's 13/16 of an inch there. I'm going to mark this on both faces. A little indicating mark there and a big X. I want to cut that mortise in the right spot. So I have both sides of the door marked. Put this at a nice working height. Clamp it to the top here to keep it close and at a good working height. And you remember that this plate drops down in this mortise. I needed to make it a 1/4 inch deep so that this fits in without interruption in the bottom of the hole. This is the index mark here, 13/16 of an inch down. I'm lining it up with that V there. And again, I'm using screw clamps because I don't want this template to wander in the process. If it wallers out that hole, then I'll be patching in and not a happy camper. That's all set up. Because this MDF is so smooth and consistent in thickness, this top of this template is just flawless. The router's not going to bounce around on that at all. I've set up a flush trim bit. This one has about a 3/8, maybe a 1/2 inch cut depth, and it's extended to a 1/2 inch plus a 1/4 for routering that 1/4 inch deep mortise. I've got compressed air handy here for cleaning out chips, which there will be an abundance of shortly. Once all that's set, I'm sure that the template's not going anywhere. It's in the right place. And then I'm ready to route. I'll do the edge on the outside going clockwise, and then I'll move to the middle and mill that out also. I'm being careful as I plunge this router in to not nick the template. Templates can be repaired, but I'd just as soon not have to. Somebody with a plunge router that was handy with it, they would be using it at this point, but I've never used one. Never really had a need or a desire to use one. So here goes, let's route. I guess you can't see the entry wound here, but that's where I plunged the router down in. I'll just work my way around. So that's one pass around the outside. I'll trace it out again just to make sure all the corners are clean and that there wasn't shavings in between the bearing and the template to make the hole inaccurate. And then I'll mill out the middle. I've always got to be careful when starting the router midway in the process like this that the bit doesn't catch and cause a disaster. I hope that video came out well, but that's what this templating process looks like. And remember, I had to do 4 of these locks with 2 escutcheons each. I had to do 8 of these recesses, and for the few minutes it took to make that template, I'd find it tough to argue that it's not worth doing. The depth of the mortise is 5/32, which is just enough for a little bit of clearance. And there's still a thin skin of wood in between this mortise and the one on the edge where the box lock goes. But you can see when the box lock is fully set that this cylinder for turning the handle goes right through that hole inside. So I have to drill 3 holes, 2 for the screws and 1 for the turning bolt into this little mortise before I can install the hardware. So I'm going to run through the gears and mortise out the other side. This is the last side of the last door here, so I'm kind of excited about it. And please, no comments about the messy shop. I know it's a mess. All this stuff's going to get put on shelves, be all organized and efficient, but right now scheduling on this job is the priority, so that other stuff is just coasting. I've got my reference mark for the 13/16 position. The way this works, the clamping pressure is on this lower piece of 1/2 inch, and it just jams this reference fence up against the edge of the door. I'm not stressing any of the glue joints in that template. I'm not clamping it down here, which I could do, but I like this positive sort of clamping for this particular fixture at this time. And even though there's just a few little strips of glue in this template, it serves the purpose. If I dropped it on the floor, I might have to stick it back together. If this was something I used for some period of time, I would probably go through the effort of clamping it together with wood glue or a whole bunch of CA glue to make sure that it was more solid. But as it is, it suits the purpose quite nicely. It's showtime. And I probably should be using a bigger router for this. I'm kind of pushing the capacity of this little Bosch Colt. But I just like how handy and maneuverable and the dexterity of this little router for this kind of thing. But you can hear the motor straining as I'm jamming it through faster than I should. But it's doing the job. Let's finish this up. You gotta love that for consistency and quality Zoom right in. If you can see the finish on the bottom of that, boy, there's barely a router mark in there. I'm quite pleased with that. And as the guys I used to work with like to say, that job is done. D-U-N. Done. Well, I'm not mic'd up here, but this is what this pocket door hardware looks like when it's installed. Plate on the edge here is all press fit into that mortise with the box lock inside. The latch mechanism is this little hook that comes out and engages a plate on the jamb. For locking and unlocking, there's a push button there to release this pull handle for sliding the pocket door shut when it's fully open. And naturally there's a key slot in here for the privacy function to override the lock if necessary. But with this level of hardware, it's essential that the fit be precise and consistent.